Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Complimentary Cinema here in the O&M Stockroom with your hosts, Brian McGarry.
And Ken O'Malley.
And Ken, what film are we going to review today on Complimentary Cinema?
So the film we have chosen today is called The Missouri Breaks, which is a reference to an area in the Old West near the source of the Missouri River. It is definitely a Western movie.
Western movie from 1976, directed by Arthur Penn, and starring, among others, Marlon Brando and Jack Nicholson. And like all of our other choices for complimentary cinema, we every week we pick a free movie, usually that's available on YouTube, that anybody at home can watch, and we always will include a link in our description below so you can check it out and leave us your thoughts and comments. And our review, of course, will be spoiler heavy. We just talk about anything and everything. So you might enjoy our little reviews if you actually watch the movie and then come in and join our podcast. I think that might be just a general recommendation moving forward. You know, or you can just listen to us and not watch the movie, or listen to us and then watch the movie and then maybe, tell us if you agreed or disagreed. But we take turns picking these movies, of course. It was my turn last time. It was Ken's turn this time. And Ken, I'd love to know, what drew you to this film this week?
Well, obviously I saw the, Marlon Brando and Jack Nicholson were starring. So that, they were the only people listed. The art I saw was a little different than the art I see here. It looked cowboyish. I was intrigued because it had the name Missouri in the title, which is the state that I hail from. You hail from the
great old state of Missouri?
I do. It's a national embarrassment a lot of the time, but that is where I'm from. And so that the name just stuck out to me, and I'd never heard about it. I didn't know anything about it before, and I'm like, well, if these two people are in it and I've never heard of it, that means either something good or bad.
And it goes without saying that we have reviewed a lot of bad movies on this channel so far. And I was thinking the same thing when I realized that Jack Nicholson and Marlon Brando were in this, because it's 1976. So Marlon Brando's been well into his career for decades now.
Right. They've both won Academy Awards by this point.
They've both won Academy Awards by this point. Jack Nicholson was an Easy Rider. Marlon Brando did The Godfather, of course. So, these are heavy, heavy hitters. And this is a movie I'd never heard of either. And it goes without saying, for those of you who haven't put two and two together yet, this was a huge box office flop.
Yeah.
Didn't go anywhere, which is kind of a shame because I actually enjoyed this one.
Yeah. And one of the first things I said to you, too, was, are you ready for another Western movie yet? Because the last one we saw, The White Buffalo, was not an impressive film.
White Buffalo was, it had its moments, but its main problem was, well, Charles Bronson, for one thing. You got to be a Charles Bronson fan to really get into that one. And this one is, it's got a very different feel and vibe to it. It has turns both comedic and almost dramatic within just moments of each other. It's a very uneven film in that regard, but well mixed. There's a bit of variety,
I think the reason why it works well is because it's all very slice of life, as far as in the normal course of life. Funny things do happen and dramatic things do happen. And so it's kind of played more realistically, I guess, in that way. A lot of things happen that aren't necessarily important to the storyline, but just kind of build that little world.
Yeah, little world building elements. Yeah, absolutely. And I like that there's so many shades of gray with these characters. Nobody's really truly good or bad. As you see, everyone's motivations are very clear. Well, I guess a better way to put it is everyone's motivations and where they're coming from are easily understood, and it's easy to empathize with the characters in this film.
That's right. And I think you can see a little bit of each character as far as, okay, I get it. Maybe I would think that way if I was in their position. So yeah, it just gives you a good, you're able to put yourself in these people's shoes and see it from their way. Everyone except for, I would say, Marlon Brando's character, but
more on that one later. So the film starts out with a few gentlemen having a talk about their their ranch work, and their one's well dressed, who appears to be the leader of this little town that they're in, which we find out is a ranch. And they come up to some people in the woods. They're having they're singing old Susanna, having a gay old time, and they're there for a good old fashioned hanging. Apparently, they had found one of the a horse rustler who was trying to steal from him and affecting their profits. Which is of course very big concern back in the old Wild West. And they decide to administer some vigilante justice, or citizen justice, if you will, and just hang this guy.
Yeah, it was a huge left turn right off the bat, because you just have these people doing small talk, and then this group of people singing and dancing. I guess not dancing too much, but really they were just singing and enjoying a picnic. It was a picnic atmosphere.
It was a very festive atmosphere, yeah.
And then all of a sudden we find out what's happening as it happens, and it's like, oh, this is a hanging. This is not just a picnic.
Yeah, it was definitely it was definitely a kind of a surprising moment for me, because I don't really know much about life on a ranch or how they may have necessarily dealt with issues of crime and justice in the old days. I mean, I've got an idea, but the way they set it up, it was definitely very effective. And so we find out that the rich man who owns the ranch is a Mr. Braxton, and the man that he killed was a Sandy Chase, who worked for Jack Nicholson's character, and he and the late, great Harry Dean Stanton basically have this group of horse stealers that kind of go from place to place and grabbing horses and taking them to relay points and then selling them somewhere else. And they're all, pretty broken up about their companion and colleague getting the noose like that. And they kind of decide, hey, maybe for our next move, let's go sit down next to Mr. Braxton and do our business right in his backyard.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of an odd approach to that problem. If like one of your people gets killed, you're going to go buddy up and get cozy in the area where it happened.
I think really it was just all so they could get close to him to steal his horses eventually. You know what I'm saying? Set up
the
shop.
long con.
Right, exactly. And all of this is kind of on the backdrop of like their whole world is like closing in, as far as like they talk about kind of in the beginning about they used to have all these different places they could go and like hide away and all these options and stuff. So like their whole, the West is getting smaller,
The West is becoming civilized
exactly.
and lawful on them.
Exactly. So that plays a lot into that too. Of we're just gonna go where they're at and make it uncivilized, and it's also part of the commentary, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So they talk about how to make some money in the meantime, and they mention, one of the kids, Little Todd, portrayed by I think it was Randy Quaid, who's also in this, the great nutso Randy Quaid, whom I think has a special place in many people's hearts for many different reasons. He's kind of like a long-term Hollywood wacko. He
has a special place in the hearts of the law enforcement agencies who are still after him, I think.
Oh God, yeah. I haven't kept up on my Randy Quaid news, but it was kind of surprising to see him in this. A young, vibrant, coherent, respectable Randy Quaid. It's not really the kind of presence that he exudes these days. But I'll have to look him up after this and see what he's been up to and see if he's still up to nefarious, irrespectable activities. So he's in this film. He plays Little Todd. He suggests, hey, why don't we go into train robbing? And they all mutually kind of dismiss it out of hand. And then, a couple of them go and they rob a train. And they bungle it a little bit, but they still make off with enough money to end up buying some land right next to Mr. Braxton.
Yeah, this scene features one of my favorite little characters in this movie.
Oh God, yeah,
Nelson.
Great. Nelson,
who is the post office worker in the back of the last car, and he is just hamming it up.
Oh, he is just he's nerdy. He's
getting robbed at gunpoint. and he pulls out the money bag. It's like, oh, I can't touch this. That's against the rules.
Pull the pin out between the other car. Well, I'm not mechanically inclined. It was fantastic. That was a very enjoyable little character in that film. Yeah, that was good. And then to rob this train, they steal a bunch of money from the back car, which they disconnect from the rest of the train. And then the train ends up at a complete stop over a bridge, which I thought was a nice, pretty funny touch, because that's not the kind of thing you would normally think about.
Yeah.
But
there's a lot of things like that in this movie. Kind of take that left turn that's unexpected, and it sometimes it's funny. It sometimes shifts things very dramatic.
Yeah,
and it's very effective throughout the movie.
It is. So after that train heist, they get some money together, lots of $1 and $10 bills, which in the 19th century, I mean, that'll get you quite a fair amount, and go a long way. So they buy some land, 4 sections. I'm not sure what that translates in acres, but they buy a little real crappy ranch, and they kind of set up a little base there while they go start plotting for some other things. And meanwhile, they never really quite say who did it, but Mr. Braxton, the rich ranch owner, his main guy, gets the noose.
Yeah.
Where they had hung Sandy, the horse stealer.
Right.
They kind of allude that it was Jack Nicholson's men, but they never really show it to you.
Yeah. There was a couple things like that where they just, you just figure it out.
You just figure it out. Yeah, they left that one ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
Because because like all through this movie, Jack Nicholson, who his character's name's Tom Logan, Tom Logan and his crew, they're not really murderers. They're not really in the business of killing. They're just trying to make some money and do it as quick and easy as possible, and without actually having to work for a living, which I think a lot of people can empathize with.
And he even says, because when they're discussing the bank robbing earlier and stuff like that, he's like, well, you don't want to get involved with criminals. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're a different kind of criminal than them, as far as we're just trying to do this thing. We're trying to steal and sell these horses, but they're not trying to rob people, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they're not trying to like put anybody like in any real danger.
On the train, they don't want to kill anyone.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because, Jack Nicholson's, telling Nelson, hey, you can say that you met with Jesse James and lived to tell the tale. And, Nelson's, he's like, you're not Jesse James. It's obvious that he doesn't have that in him to be that kind of a scoundrel, I guess. But that's what makes this little band of characters so likable. Like their first moment in town, they just they buy the ranch, and then they very sheepishly go around to a whorehouse, and be like, hey, got any girls? They can't even man up and be like, we're here to party. We want some women.
Yeah. For the most part, they seem like decent people. And both Cam, is that right? Cal, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Cal.
Both Cal and Cy are kind of the wise people in the group, as far as they're the smart. They've been around a little bit longer than the other ones are a little bit younger. Mm-hmm. And so when the younger, more rambunctious ones, I want to just go do something, or they're playing grab ass or whatever, the wiser two of the group are kind of reining things in and keeping them on track.
Yeah. Yeah, because you got Randy Quaid playing Little Todd. You've got Frederick Forrest playing Carrie. A lot of people, he's not been in a ton of stuff, but for people who've seen Falling Down, which is a great movie I've recommended to you recently, he's got a small but very important role in that film. He plays another one of the younger, more rambunctious kids, and then there's Cy, portrayed by John P. Ryan, who I didn't really know from much, but he was in The Right Stuff. He was kind of like one of the lead NASA guys when they were picking the first 7 astronauts. So that's, pretty good, respectable actor there. And then, of course, Henry Dean Stanton and Jack Nicholson is the truly wise men. So they go to this whorehouse. They have their fun, and
it's also noteworthy. A lot of these scenes, these smaller kind of scenes, Like they get you involved in it, and then we go to the next scene. Like they don't dwell on it too much. They get the point across, and then we move on, which works really well, I think, because it shows that that's where like the slice of life comes in.
That's that extra bit of detail, like a little bit of, this is kind of how maybe things were a little bit back then. I mean, I've read that this was a revisionist Western film. I'm not really quite sure what they mean by that.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, tidying things up a little more than they may have been, or maybe sensationalizing things more than they were.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Well, that would be a subject for another discussion in the future. So after the whorehouse, I'm going to say that again.
You just wanted to say that one more time.
Whorehouse.
Whorehouse.
So after the whorehouse, they go about their business. They start planning their next little thing. And meanwhile, so Mr. Braxton finds his main henchman dead. Let's get back on track here, And he's like, oh, he gets really upset. So he calls in Marlon Brando's character, Lee Clayton. And Marlon Brando's character doesn't show up in this film till about 35, 36 minutes into the film. And when I saw him, my heart sank. Mm-hmm. I was just like, oh no, I was enjoying this film.
Like up until this point, we were like, wow, this is really good. Like this is all like, it's very interesting.
I was getting into it. I'm liking all the characters. I'm loving the dialogue in this film.
Yeah. Dialogue was good. Scenes and like scenery all looks good.
Set decoration, definitely a sizable budget production with, a great cast. And then Marlon Brando shows up looking like an eccentric crackhead Ben Franklin, with stylized dress and, this white horse. And, our introduction to his character is him hanging off the side of the horse and then kind of peeking around, talking to Braxton's daughter, Jane, played by Kathleen Lloyd, who was in another great film called The Car, also from the mid-'70s. And I just, as soon as I saw him, I knew I was going to get irritated. And it didn't take very long for that to happen. And now, why would that be, Ken? Why would Marlon Brando be irritating in this movie?
Because he just did whatever the hell he wanted to do.
That is correct. He basically improvised and ad-libbed his lines, and apparently needed cue cards in his scenes.
I could see, as far as the character and what he needs to do throughout the film, I could see what they wanted, like what the character should have been.
Sure.
And then you can see what he did. It's so obvious. It's so crazy.
It sticks out like a turd in a punch bowl.
He's
he's supposed to be quote unquote a regulator, which is a fancy term for a bounty hunter,
right?
Or a mercenary, to hunt down the people that were, stealing Braxton horses and, killing his man. Okay, I get it. So he wanted somebody with a good reputation, and it ends up being a really eccentric and flamboyant Marlon Brando making up his lines as he goes, pretty much trashing the script for this film. So up until this point, we're seeing the film as it was written and scripted. Okay, we're actually getting the writer and director's actual vision for this up until Marlon Brando shows up. And then after that, they have to build and work this whole fucking movie around this past his prime overweight Hollywood actor, which is essentially what the rest of this film is.
Yeah.
It's them trying to work around him to keep the story cohesive and keep it moving.
And this character is completely nuts.
Completely nuts, which is fitting because Marlon Brando was completely nuts at this point in his life.
Yep.
If not completely nuts, at least pretty damn close, I would say.
He's like he's just a very small, tiny bit off from being the Joker.
Almost, yeah. He becomes very his character is unhinged and is motivated more by cruelty than he is anything that is traditionally moral and ethical, I would say.
So at this point, it's fair to say we both kind of had this like, oh no, like,
Oh no.
like
And I even said, oh no, out loud.
like this was going really well, and all of a sudden this wrecking ball came through, because his first scene wasn't really good either. It would be one thing if it was crazy and it was good, but it was crazy and it wasn't really that good.
And the real reason I said, oh no, not because it was Marlon Brando, because I realized it was Marlon Brando at this phase in his life when he had gotten just so lost up his own ass that he was just, well, behaving like this in films. And I knew that I knew what kind of direction he was going to take when he was introduced in that fashion. I was like, ah, shit, this is what's going to happen now. We're going to have, a weirdo. And to his credit, his character did grow on me as the film progressed. And I do feel like his scenes got better. Maybe he just needed to warm up into the role for a bit.
I think it's also the fact that character did better in one-on-one interactions than he did necessarily in the beginning too, when it was like this big group and there's no one to like emote back. There was no one to play off of. There was no one to show like a reaction in a way that you would empathize with. So, and I do think it just got better eventually.
It did get better for sure, and it definitely just took time to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So he shows up and he's basically hired to start looking around and figure out who did this to his man, and he immediately just kind of zeroes in on Tom Logan, Jack Nicholson's character, and starts, they kind of have this, in their initial meeting, he's getting a pony or a donkey out of some water. Forgive me for not knowing the difference. And, Marlon Brando's up there, and you can immediately tell that they don't like each other and that they're kind of onto each other, and their dialogue, it's Jack Nicholson kind of insinuates that you basically, when you shoot a man from a mile away, you basically don't have any honor. You're not giving a man a chance to be contrite or to ask for forgiveness or even make a last statement or anything. There's no judge and jury. It's just execution. And Marlon Brando's character really counters with, it's all about achieving the task.
Mm-hmm.
He has a real single-mindedness of purpose, which is certainly kind of a chilling thing early on. You kind of really see what this guy's all about. He doesn't care about the finer things about justice. It's about just getting something done.
It's about doing what he wants to do.
Absolutely. As we find out.
The way he wants to do it, which is why I think eventually it plays better when you get past how crazy and eccentric it is, when you just get to that, he's of a single goal, a single mind, and the way he gets there seems chaotic, but it's all heading towards that one point. And kind of what you were talking about there too is, I think, the base of the movie, because you have this group of people who are horse thieves. Obviously, that's not a good thing. Like, you would consider maybe to be the bad guys or something. You also have the ranch owner guy who is, penny pinching, and he's all, obviously is fine with killing people if he thinks they're lawless and stuff like that. And then you have this other person who all he cares about is the hunt and killing people and doing things his way. And all of these groups of people could be seen as a bad guy, or under a certain point of view, a good guy. Some people say, oh, well, the lawman obviously is just good, or, the landowner is good. I guess most people wouldn't say a horse thief is good, but they could be seen under a much different light.
As the film progresses, this group of people, even from the very first scene when we're introduced to the horse thieves, you never get the vibe that they're just scoundrels. Like, there's some loose talk about, just sleeping around a little bit, and they're talking about their jobs, but
like you said, they're sheepish about it. It's not like they're trying to violate anyone, or like, they're like, they're just boys getting up to some mischief.
Yeah, that's really it, and they take pride and dignity in their work too, to a point. And they're not after like chaos, I guess. It's hard to explain, but you basically take an immediate liking to them. Like they have a rapport, and they take the news of, their colleague Sandy Chase's death with solemnity, but also with just acceptance that their way of life does involve risk. And you immediately just kind of like them all immediately, just even in spite of yourself. And it becomes quickly becomes difficult to empathize with the ranchers themselves. But once they bring Lee Clayton in, Marlon Brando's character, you definitely start to like the ranchers more because there's an even more screwed up and darker presence to compare them with and contrast them with.
Mm-hmm. So it's also worth noting that the other character, Jane, is kind of seeing Tom, sorry.
Jack Nicholson, yeah. Jack Nicholson's Tom.
Okay, so anyway, so there's also this other character, Jane, that's Mr. Braxton's daughter, and she is seeing Tom through this point. So she wants to be involved with him. He has a lot of charm, and he's very smart. So, they kind of play back and forth with each other, and so she's like another character that's kind of linking them all together. Mm-hmm. As far as she sees him for who he is, personality, and he's interesting, and he really cares about things.
Yeah, he's not just a devil may care horse thief. Like he actually has, he has some respectability, and she also picks up very quickly that he's not quite on the level. Mm-hmm. Like his backstory doesn't quite add up. Their story to get into town, like, oh, I dealt in farming implements. It's like, yeah, nobody buys that. And she figures out he's an outlaw pretty quick, but doesn't care too much.
It's basically, it's like, it's almost one of those, like, you're not one of those kind of outlaws. Like, it's like she kind of figures that out too.
It's like he's the charming bad boy, but not the guy going around just shooting people, Right. Like he doesn't even like carrying a gun really. Mm-hmm. But she also like abhors like, senseless death too. Like she was very upset at Sandy Chase's hanging, and she definitely has a strong sense of morality too. And I think, in the first meeting between Tom Logan and Jane, when he first comes to town, that comes up, and and as that was his friend and the person he worked with, they immediately kind of bond over that, even though he puts on airs like, oh yeah, you absolutely have to hang the thieves and blah, blah, blah. He just under the subtext underneath that is like, yeah, okay, I like you. You get it. So you definitely see that glint of recognition in him at that meeting. Yeah. So, so they start carrying on. And, and what's funny is, as they begin their relationship and start carrying on, Mr. Lee Clayton, instead of, actually looking for horse stealers, he's spying on them. Mm-hmm. And being kind of pervy and weird about it because he's Marlon Brando in the 70s.
Yeah, it's really weird and creepy.
It is weird. It is weird and creepy. And
he's just watching him roll around in the grass and smiling and singing, humming to himself and stuff.
All ad-libbed, by the way. All of his singing in this was ad-libbed, and there's a couple scenes of that, which is unnecessary, but it's whatever. It is what it is.
It adds to the madness of his character.
It adds to the madness of his character, his unhinged attitude. It's funny. So like, the character of the regulator is, he kind of does what he wants. Guess what? He was portrayed by an actor who does what he wants. It makes me wonder, how was that character originally intended? Mm-hmm. Was it truly a character that did what he wanted to do?
See, I could have seen it as someone who's even more reserved as far as playing the angle of playing things close to the chest and, not telegraphing what his intentions are with these other people. The way that Brando's character does a little bit at a couple points. I could definitely see him being played more that way.
Yeah.
And just not crazy at all, So maybe more proper, but not crazy.
So while Tom and Jane are carrying on, most of the rest of his crew, they go up to Canada to try and steal some horses from some Mounties that predictably goes, terribly awry. And, one gets a finger shot off. They lose all their horses. And one of their people, little Todd, gets separated from him. And he ends up running into Lee Clayton, who kind of ensnares him and ends up dispatching him, so to speak. And you see, I think that was the first scene you were saying that, I don't know, why don't you tell us your impression of that initial meeting with them and everything?
So I think it was a turning point for him as far as you saw beyond the madness. So he started playing a different character. He pretends to little Todd that he is a horse thief. He tried to get his trust, basically saying, oh, well, he tells him what his fake business is, like, oh, this is where I was and I was trying to steal horses and it's not going so well. Like, what are you up to? And little Todd doesn't go for it, You
really have the impression that little Todd's just going to give everything away, but he actually, he does a good job and keeps his mouth shut and he protects his friends.
But he's also not perfect and he's not great necessarily at talking, so he does slip up as far as he doesn't have a good story. And
he can't remember the name of the town he's from either.
And he was trying to run away, obviously. So he just came across as suspicious. And so even though he didn't give up any information and he didn't really mess up, because Lee Clayton is so unhinged, he already knows that he is who he's looking for anyway. And he's already going to kill him anyway.
It's like he's made up his mind about it when he first meets him, and he just spends like the night just toying with him.
Yep.
And it's but it's just a great interaction between Randy Quaid, who would become insane, with Marlon Brando, who kind of was insane at that point.
Yeah.
It was a nice. It's kind of.
Randy Quaid gives an excellent, earnest performance, though.
He really does, though. I mean, this is young Randy Quaid when he had all of his mental faculties and emotional faculties intact. And I just kind of wonder if maybe he caught something from Marlon Brando during the filming of this.
He's like, this guy's on to something.
Yeah, he's on to something. But, but yeah, because like in that scene, I mean, you really see the quality of Randy Quaid's character, how he's really trying to do right by his people, but he's just inexperienced and just, caught off guard. And you see Marlon Brando's methodology with approaching this character and demonstrating how this regulator operates as a cunning hunter.
Yeah. And he's not at all what you might have expected, as far as, they said earlier, like, oh, he just shoots people from far away.
No, he really doesn't.
Well, here he really gets up close
and personal,
and really tries to sell that character to get close to him.
And how he does dispatch with Randy Quaid's character is they're crossing a river, with a couple of horses, and he ends up tying him around with some rope and basically drowns him. And while he's drowning him, he gives him just a brief moment to give him some information, and then he lets him drown. So it's like you really get the feeling he never cared about information anyway. He just wanted to just torture the guy a little bit and then let him pass on. So you really figure out with that particular one that he really is a cold-blooded son of a bitch.
Yeah. Immediately worried for everyone else in this film at that point.
You really are, because you know that he's not, because that's the scene when you really figure out, like, he doesn't care about justice. He doesn't care about doing the right thing. Like, he just wants to kill people.
Because up until this point, we knew he was crazy, but we weren't, his motivation could have just been to get paid or, whatever else. But it's at that point where you really can tell that he's just doing it because that's what he wants to do.
It's just what he wants to do. He just wants to go around and just for an excuse to kill people. And after that, little Todd's horse is given like a bullet cartridge, like tied to his saddle or whatever. And then that horse makes it back to the Tom Logan camp. And Tom Logan, realizes what's happened to little Todd.
Well, because this cartridge is used from a special gun.
A very special gun.
Which it's noted that a
Creedmoor.
That Lee Clayton has. he's known for using.
Yeah, so he has that special cartridge. So, Tom Logan immediately knows. I didn't quite pick up on that, so thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
And, so he ends up, so Tom Logan gets it, and he immediately goes and confronts Marlon Brando's character in the bathtub. And that is a fantastic scene.
Mm-hmm.
The level of intensity and hatred that Jack Nicholson's character's emoting at that point is spectacular, and you can feel it, and you could like cut it with a knife. It's so rich, and again, Marlon Brando's character Lee Clayton, he is just so aloof and just so nonchalant, and just doesn't give a shit that Jack Nicholson's caught him in the bath. He just doesn't care. He's like, "Oh, shoot me." It's like, well, nah, I'm not gonna do anything. I need to eat first. My tummy's rumbling. I mean, the guy is absolutely batshit.
Yeah.
And he. He even turns his back to Jack Nicholson at one point. Just like, go ahead and shoot me. And, doesn't
it's
quite.
It's even worse than that, though. He just doesn't even acknowledge that anything's going to happen to him.
Yeah. I mean, he's really, and you realize, and just Jack Nicholson, Tom Logan will not kill Lee Clayton in this because he has too much honor. He just won't shoot a man in the back.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to like face him out in the open, and Lee Clayton is just so far gone that he just won't even play that. Won't even give him the opportunity.
And it just shows you a lot too, as far as where society at this point is pointing to the fact that Lee Clayton is like a person to be desired, as far as he's the lawman bringing justice. And so This is kind of showing the flip side of that, is that this horse thief is the person who is honorable and stand up, basically. Not even just, I want to shoot you. Like, he doesn't even want to shoot him out in the open either. It's just, he's being put in this situation.
He knows that his friend was murdered.
Right.
And it's personal.
Mm-hmm.
Just a very tense exchange, and then after that.
And a brilliant ending to the scene. And then the gun goes off, and it turns out he's shot the tub so that the water's draining out.
And it just goes everywhere in the downstairs dining room.
But it's just a beautiful kind of, you get your gunshot, your gunshot moment, and then it's how it's resolved.
And Jack Nicholson just walks out.
Just to inconvenience him.
Yeah. And then so after that, they decide to steal Braxton's horses. Tom Logan and his crew steal Braxton's horses, and at some point, maybe take care of Lee Clayton. They don't necessarily go into specifics on what they want to do.
Yeah, they're gonna split up and go different ways too, so that they're not as conspicuous. So each one of them is gonna take horses and go a different direction. And then they're all gonna meet up afterwards after they get all the money, basically. So they're just gonna get out of town, and that'll solve their problems.
Solves them for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then what ends up happening, hey, they get the horses. They get their money. And then, Lee Clayton shows up. How does he, do you want to talk about that one a little bit?
Well, he comes in, it's been shown early in the movie that he looks through binoculars. That's another big part of his character. So you see through his eyes early on when he's creeping on people.
Mm-hmm.
So you see through those binocular lenses. So we get to a scene where one of the gang members is, what was the first one?
So the first one is Cy, played by John Ryan, and he's gone to like an acquaintance's place, his farm, and
that's right.
Sells him some horses. He has dinner. There's a really great exchange where the homeowner, quotes Thomas Jefferson inside, kind of looks at him, is like, "Who is that?" In this really naive and innocent way.
But they also show in a good way that, like, he's not dumb. He also makes a good point too, about when the homeowner kind of makes an offhand comment like, "I know these horses are stolen." That was a very expert rebranding. Were you behind that? And he's like,
So he's definitely a man of skill and intelligence, but just basic academic learning is just, not within his reach.
Right.
Which I think is true for, many people today.
He's
of
very
course.
practical knowledge
Very
for where
practical.
he lives,
Yes.
but not about the world. So, but yeah, he ends up going out with the homeowner's wife, and
Yep, right after dinner, they meet up at the a side of a barn or something.
she gives him 5 minutes to do whatever.
Yeah.
So, in the middle of that, then we get the gunshot out of nowhere, and it turns out that the regulator has been stalking him all along.
Yeah.
Um,
Right in the middle of I guess we could call that coitus interruptus.
yes.
Right in the middle of the act of sexual congress, he gets rubbed out.
It's another one of... Wow.
I went there.
Wow. So it's another one of these kind of left turn moments, though, where it's like, they don't set up that he's about to get shot. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Not at
you
all.
don't ever see these things coming. I mean, you can see that eventually they're going to get hunted.
You'd think something might happen.
Because Lee's out there and he's crazy.
You didn't expect it right in the middle of getting it on with the wife of the man you just sold your stolen horses to.
It's very effective, though.
It is effective. It is a
very
little bit
sudden.
startling,
Yeah.
And then the next guy that they get is Carrie, played by Frederick Forrest. And the bastard shoots him in an outhouse.
Yeah.
And he ends up dying with his ass hanging out.
Yeah.
So
In front of a whole town full of people.
In front of a town full of people. I mean, so Lee Clayton really has absolutely no scruples about giving first off, anybody a chance to defend themselves. He always strikes them when they're at their most vulnerable. And you've got, in both cases, both these men had their pants down. I mean, that's pretty low, and that says a lot about what just an asshole that character is. And then the next guy he gets is Harry Dean Stanton's character, Cal. And the way that one started was actually really impressive. He basically has like a zip line of some flammable liquid and shoots it, and it explodes over the hut that he's in, and just sets it and him on fire. Cal's able to dunk into some water and stop the fire, but I mean, he's messed up pretty bad.
He's very badly burned.
Very badly burned. I mean, and that's in the middle of the night when he's in his pajamas. No gun, no nothing. Then the guy finishes him off after another insane Marlon Brando speech, of which we're subjected to a lot of Marlon Brando monologues in this one. Thank God they don't go on for too long, but there's enough of them to, you could almost make a drinking game out of that.
Yeah.
And then at some point, Tom Logan figures out what's been going on to his friends, and he finally tracks down Lee. In the scene leading up to that, we have a scene of just this scene really just it took me a minute to just kind of deal with it. It's Marlon Brando being lovey towards his horse. I can't remember whose lips he said the horse had, but the horse had the eyes of Cleopatra, and then he takes out his harmonica and he's like, I dedicate this song to the only woman I ever loved. His horse right behind him. And it's effective in showing that he doesn't care about people. He can't seem to relate to them in that regard. But man, that was just a weird, uncomfortable scene, and exactly the kind of thing I was kind of groaning about at the beginning of his appearance in this film.
He's just in his own universe.
He really is.
And nothing in that scene has anything to do with anything else in the movie other than it's just him, I guess his character, if you want to look at it that way, just being this crazy, weird dude out in the middle of the woods.
It's in some respects, it's a self-indulgent thing. It's a very self-indulgent scene for that actor.
The reason I think it plays better later in the movie than it did earlier is because once he starts taking people out, it really breaks up that like the building tension.
Sure.
It really breaks it up in a good way because you kind of need that at this point. There's going to be a confrontation between the two remaining people.
Yeah, Tom Logan and...
They're the main people, and that's going to be a big showdown.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a nice little... It is a nice little scene to give insight into him and just how he comports himself when no one's watching. Mm-hmm. So again, in a way, a slice of life, a little world building moment. And it is effective at that. It's just the way that Marlon Brando chose to go about it was kind of weird. But I think we established that that's just the kind of actor that he was at this point. And so after his little ode to his horse is the final confrontation between Tom Logan and Marlon and Lee Clayton. And do you know what I love about this scene? It shows you everything and nothing.
Yep. Intense. Very intense.
It's a very intense scene.
Yep.
And it's over a little more quickly than you might expect.
Mm-hmm. Very enjoyable.
Very enjoyable and very well done. And, I read later that apparently Marlon Brando and Jack Nicholson absolutely hated each other on set. And I think you can see some of that, not only in the bathtub scene, but this scene also.
Mm-hmm. And the scene where they're in the garden. That
was yeah. That was a good one.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Mm-hmm. You can really see it back and forth with the two of them. And it's almost a shame that they didn't have a little bit more together.
It really would have been powerful. Yeah, it might have been better for the film.
Yeah.
For sure. Just to have just one more scene with them would have been nice. But we got 4 solid scenes. We got their initial meeting by that little creek. We got their meeting in the garden. We got their bathtub scene, and then we got that final face to face, if you will.
Yep, I think it was great. I really liked all their interactions. Maybe their supposed real life hatred helped build that up, as far as motivated them to be a little more antagonistic.
It's hard to see how it couldn't. It certainly added some spice to their performances, I think, certainly on Jack Nicholson's part.
Yeah.
Because as he was the sane one of the two, I think you can see a little more honest frustration with Brando's eccentricities and the difficulties he was creating on set with his improvisations and ad-libbing. And the fact that apparently, I mentioned this, I'm going to mention it again, that he needed cue cards while he was, doing his performances and kept looking away from whoever he was acting with. Sloppy stuff, I think, for an actor of any caliber, to be honest. So, and yes, I mean, that's pretty much a good rundown of that film, I think. Let's talk about the best performance in this film. Who ranks up at the highest there for you?
I think Jack Nicholson would be for me the best, hands down. Very charming in a believable way. Good mastermind for the group, and you can really see how his mind works throughout the film, which is a good when you see it and no one has to explain it to you. That really makes a character better, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And my close, I'd agree with you on that. My close second would definitely be Harry Dean Stanton. Mm-hmm. He does not have as many lines and as much screen time as some of the other characters, but he really exudes a fantastic presence.
Yeah.
And he has one scene in particular where he's talking about an episode in his youth, which kind of formed his worldview. And he delivers that one really, really well. And it's understated, but also intense, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot of fire underneath his words that's smoldering, but not quite burst into flames.
And he has a lot of wisdom, and it's really played up as far as he's been around the block, so he's definitely the character that knows the most. You can tell he
definitely feels like the old man of the group. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in a good way, a very good way.
He keeps himself the cleanest. He has the most public presentable public persona, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Jack,
and also going along with them, like that kind of that whole group, also respectful,
yeah,
in his own way.
yeah, absolutely. So those are definitely the two greatest. And so for every great performance, you have to have the weakest performance.
I mean, Brando's obviously crazy, so
He's obviously crazy.
I don't know if it's the worst,
but is it the worst? Yeah,
I don't know
know
if it's the worst. I mean, it's just bad shit, weird and crazy, but it turned out not to be bad. So I don't know if you could say worst. It's definitely off kilter and strange.
Yeah, it definitely. I'll say this, just to reframe the question a little bit. Does anybody else's performance in the film bring the entire film down a notch?
No.
No. So I think in a worst, I mean, worst may not be the best, most appropriate term, but I think
everyone else did decently.
Everybody else did great, but
everyone else
Brando,
was believable.
But Brando brought the film down a notch.
Yeah,
he definitely brought it down a little bit.
He went too far.
He did go too far. I think he had a good idea with what he was trying, and then he just took it too far, and he just didn't know when the fuck to pull back.
Yeah. So I think it would have been interesting to have a character where he was a little wacky on the surface to put people off, but then under you could see that wasn't really who he was. That would have worked as a character.
That would have worked, but instead
this was just he was wacky all the way through.
He was just wacky all the way through, and that felt one-dimensional to me.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it was just distracting to the tone of the film.
Yeah.
It was. He felt like he felt anachronistic to the film,
right?
In some respects,
and especially in a film where you're trying to see things from 3 different points of view, it's impossible to see from his point of view because you can't get into his his place.
That's a really great point. So I think we could agree that worst performance probably Marlon Brando on this.
This movie would have definitely been elevated with another more serious actor, or just playing a more serious character in that role. You had
asked me before we did any additional little reading on this, who would have been a great fill-in for the Lee Clayton character instead of Brando. And I'm not as well versed in this era of film or in Westerns in general, so I couldn't really think of anybody off the top of my head. And then in the reading, Steve McQueen was offered the role. A bad motherfucker of an actor who did some real classics. But he turned it down because at the time, at least, he was saying he was retired from acting. And he would have been fantastic in that role. And I think if Steve McQueen had been in the Lee Clayton role in this film, it wouldn't have been a box office flop. And I think the film really would have been elevated, and it really would be one that people talk about today, maybe.
Yeah.
It certainly wouldn't be one of these forgotten films that, at least for our generation. I mean, I don't know anybody our age in our age group who really knows this.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a shame because 3/4 of this film work really well.
Mm-hmm.
And is actually really, really enjoyable to watch.
And even saying that Brando was the worst, we still both came around on him.
He did grow on us, yes. Because ultimately, as batshit as he is, he's Marlon Brando. And that's the thing that just irks me about him, is that he irritates the snot out of me, but he's also really good at what he does too. Mm-hmm. And justly so. And he's justly famous for that reason, even, many years after his death. He was one of the greats for a long time. And I just wish he had taken a different approach to that role. Some improvisation, but also film the script,
Mm-hmm.
Do some both, and then maybe let, the director pick the best bits instead of making the director give up and just let you do what you want.
Yeah.
Because that really did affect the film, because it's all about the end product. You can bring your best to the table, but it's, a film is a group effort. Everybody has to be working towards a common goal here. And if you're just there just to do your thing and cater to your own artistic and creative efforts and desires, that's not necessarily going to produce a satisfying end result for the people involved and for the audience that you're trying to, entertain or reach through this.
Yeah.
But he did come around.
Yeah.
He did get better.
He was okay.
He was okay. This could have been a great film, I think.
I agree.
Instead of just a good film that nobody's seen.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, the story was good. Characters were well written. And there's just so many good things going on in this film. And I have to say that the only reason it wasn't well received is because he was so off-putting.
He was.
I mean, I can't think of anything else in this movie that people would look at and say, "Oh, I didn't really like that."
Oh, there are a couple things though. Now that you mention it, so there is the use of the N-word a few times earlier in the film. Some animals were harmed in the filming of this.
Yeah, that's true.
Some horses were drowned in some river crossing scenes. Some other animals were killed. I think like a rabbit in one case.
Mm-hmm.
So there are certain things like that which definitely were even off-putting even at the time. And are certainly off-putting today.
Yeah.
So if you do watch this film, please keep those caveats in mind. It is a product of a less conscious time, socially conscious time. And I guess another point too that we like to talk about, just to completely ham-handedly go into another segue here, soundtrack / score. One category we like to talk about. John Williams of Star Wars fame did the score to this. He did a score to another film that we did recently. I can't remember which one that was.
It was the last one we watched.
Was it?
No.
No, or maybe the one before. They're all kind of blending together at this point.
Yeah.
You can only watch so many movies without, forgetting all of them. But this one was really good because it was not really an orchestral arrangement at all. It was, you had like banjos, you had some guitars, like you had much more traditional organic instruments. I mean, organic versus, electronic or something. But it was a very expressive score, and it definitely caught your attention too. And it really was effective at like setting tone and mood, and letting you know when something was maybe just a little bit silly, without being like overly silly. So I mean, it was nicely done. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it integrated well, just kind of in the background. It didn't ever take over, as far as some other John Williams scores do.
Oh, where it just completely envelops what's on the screen and you don't even see it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's definitely more in the background and more blends in well, which is why it works well.
But it's still, because I mean, we talk about the score and soundtrack on, in every film that we look at, and a lot of them are just completely forgettable. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you can't even remember if there was music in it.
And this one, even you mentioned it too, like when they were at the river, that they really went heavy with the bass.
Oh yeah, there was like practically like 70s funk bass in there.
But it was like whenever it was one of those cues though.
Yeah.
Okay, we're coming up to the river. Here comes the bass is coming back in. It's an active place. The water's moving.
Yeah.
They're crossing, so there's a little danger. So like it really worked well into it. And I didn't even think of it. It was subconscious for me until you said something about it out loud. So
like there's that bass again, and the bass guitar was an interesting choice. At least it sounded like a bass guitar. I mean, it could have been a stand-up bass, but it sounded electric a little bit. Certainly electrically amplified, and it just sent an interesting tone too. But yeah, it was just overall a good score. I liked it, enjoyed it. So moving on to our last little bit here, Ken. Would you recommend this film?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would too.
I really enjoyed it all the way through, which is not common necessarily for the kind of movies we watch. It was great that it was something I'd never heard of, and would have never watched this for any other reason ever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really a kind of a hidden gem from the 70s. Fantastic cast, really great writing, great dialogue. I really enjoyed the cinematography on this one, the way that the scenes were shot, the way that they were framed, and even with Marlon Brando's eccentricities in this film, it's definitely worth watching his performance. especially with the scenes with Jack Nicholson, which I think is fair to say are all of Brando's best scenes as well.
Yeah.
Like, that's really when his character shines the most.
Which he has that other character anchor around.
Yes.
Whereas when he's off on his own or with other characters that don't necessarily have the strength or the just kind of the
They don't have the
presence.
they don't have the gravitas
Right. To reel him in a little.
to reel him in a little bit and also just
And focus him.
just counterbalance him a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, it's Jack Nicholson does have that in this film. So in that regard, those two were well cast because you really feel when he's with Jack Nicholson, that's his match.
Mm-hmm.
You don't feel that when he's with the other characters. So I think that that's an interesting little angle there too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like that's the one man that can best him,
Yeah.
and vice versa.
I really enjoyed all the little, like I said, kind of just the slice of life moments. And you really felt like you were involved in this whole situation.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely would recommend it, and I think I would even watch it again someday.
Yeah, I definitely think it's worthy.
All right, well, that concludes this week's episode of Complimentary Cinema here on the O&M Stockroom, and we're your hosts.
I am Ken O'Malley.
And Brian McGarry. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week with another cheap, free YouTube movie for our reviewing pleasure, and have a great night.